We are going to have an overall subtopic or an overall topic today of a strong start for the United States of America. So I'll kind of review a little bit, then I'll tell you when probably you should start writing things down. Now, you have to remember that we just got done winning an American Revolution. Okay, and we kind of talked about this a little bit Friday. And all of a sudden, there's an old saying, you got to watch what you wish for, because we wanted independence so bad, but now we're in a situation where we're on our own. We don't have the British defending us from enemy attacks. We don't have the British telling us what to do, but we don't have anything in place to tell us what to do. Does that make sense? Well, the first thing that they need to do is they need to choose a leader for the new United States of America. So on your notes, we'll just kind of do this together. Your overall topic, and I would write it down there and underline it, is a strong start for the United States of America. So everybody write that down at the top. A strong start for the United States of America, and underline it. Then underneath that, write down choosing a leader for the new United States of America as your first subtopic. That's why it's really important you have that green sheet in front of you so you can follow through. I don't give you that because I don't think it'll be helpful. I normally give you that because I think it will. Okay? So it's right on your sheet. That's the point. Okay? So a strong start for the new United States of America is the topic, and choosing a leader for the new United States of America is your subtopic. Now, you have to remember here, and this is kind of an interesting scenario, that all of the 13 colonies basically were governed by themselves. They governed themselves. Though there was not one unified government that told Massachusetts to do the same thing as Georgia. They all had their own people that were running the colonies. They had their own congresses. They had their own legislators. They had their own governments, so to speak, within each colony. So the job's going to be now is to take those 13 separate entities and combine them into one entity. And you've got to remember that even though they were in the American colonies, these congresses or governmental bodies that were governing each colony, each one was used to a monarchy. Okay? And what's a monarchy again, Mr. Nelson? Do you remember?
One person in charge, everyone else to.
According to family bloodline. Okay? So if you think about that, you have the King of England who inherited that kingship, so to speak, because he was the bloodline that went through. Does that mean that every single person that ascends to the British crown is very good at what they do?
No.
You're not elected like a president of the United States by the people. You just get a lead because you're next in line. And you might be a cruddy leader. Matter of fact, if you go back prior to this, prior to the Revolutionary War, when we were moving towards independence, the King of England was King George III, who's still the King of England when we start right here in 1789. He served from 1620 to 1820, or not 1620, excuse me, 1720 to 1820 in that era, 1863. Anyway, the point being is this, is that he survived the Revolutionary War and lost. And he was very ineffective leader, very ineffective, okay? So who really runs the government in England is the Parliament. Okay, it's like the Congress here. Okay, now here's where you need to start kind of keying in a little bit. The Congresses here were used to a monarchy. They were used to a family running the country with a Congress. The problem was each of the Congresses were different. Okay, and so now these Congresses had to get together from each colony and elect a president of the United States. Okay? Now things were different, and this kind of ties into where we're at today, is how do you get elected president today, Willow? Is it the most people that vote for the person's president? No.
It's the person who represents our country. They don't have to listen to the.
I talked about that. Yeah, we talked about the elector. The electoral count is what matters. Electors are the ones that elect the president. Okay? So in this, we talked about this before. Barrasso, Enzi, Cheney are our electors. And they're the ones that actually elect the president. And that started way back with these guys because the population was much different, and these guys that were congressmen didn't believe the average person was smart enough to elect a president. So who elected the president back in 1789? Congress did. There was no vote, so to speak, in a lot of ways. There was, but the final say always came to the electors. So these electors would be decided by, like we talked about, the population in each colony. Now, Congress believed that they only should vote on the president because of their experience with the candidates. Would the Congress people know who George Washington was? Sure they would. Would the person that lived over here in the western lands between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, would they know who in the world George Washington was? So the electors didn't feel like this person's vote was worth anything because they didn't know who they were even voting for. So they believed, Congress believed, that they should elect the president, that only they could give a legitimate vote. So it was agreed upon by Congress that the person who received the most votes in this upcoming election of 1789 would be president, and whoever got second would be vice president. That's not the way it works today, does it? You got to run on political parties, and if you vote for one party, you vote for both candidates. It wasn't the case then. When they had these elections, the first top vote getter would be the president, and the second vote getter would be the vice president. So, this is where we really need to kind of key in. On February 4th, write that down, on February 4th of 1789, on February 4th of 1789, these congressmen got together in their own colonies and they voted for President of the United States. So if you were a congressman from Massachusetts, you voted for President in Massachusetts. If you were a congressman from Georgia, you voted in Georgia. The congressman voted. Just like if this was 28 different states in this room, okay, 28 different states, Raymond would stay in his own state and vote for the candidates for president. Okay? You would stay, William, in your own state and vote. That's kind of how you do it now, but it's just the electors. They didn't get together. Now, there were some people running for president, but when all of these electors voted, George Washington got every single vote. So what do you still need then? The second place person's going to be the vice president. So they had to have a second ballot. And on the second ballot, a fellow by the name of John Adams, you've heard of him, I'm sure, John Adams, received all of the votes, and so he became vice president. Now that is so unusual in today's politics, but nobody wanted the job. I mean, can you imagine? So George Washington and John Adams run for president and vice president. Let me rephrase, I said it wrong. John Adams and George Washington run for president. Okay, whoever gets the first amount of votes is going to be president, second amount of votes, vice president. Well, Washington gets them all. So then some other people join the vice presidential race on the second ballot, and Adams wins and becomes the vice president. Now, we're talking about President of the United States and Vice President of the United States. In those days, they didn't have a name for it. That was the next thing. What are we going to call this person who is going to be our leader of the new United States of America? Now, you know what John Adams wanted you to call him instead of saying President Donald J. Trump? What did John Adams want the president called? Anybody want to guess? Kind of royal thinking, royalty thinking. His, want to be called George Washington, His Majesty. Have you ever heard that before? His Majesty. That's what John Adams wanted, His Majesty. He wanted it not to be George Washington, President of the United States. He wanted to be George Washington, His Majesty. Well, George Washington didn't like that. Now, do you know why he wouldn't like that? This is really kind of an unusual little fact. In those days, the rule was if you were His Majesty, you were required to shake hands with everyone within distance of you. That was the rule. And George Washington didn't want to do that. He didn't want to shake hands with every single person he was introduced to. So he didn't want the term His Majesty. Okay? So guess what George Washington wanted to be called? And it got kind of shortened. His Excellency, the President. He wanted to be called His Excellency the President because you didn't have to shake hands with everybody if you were His Excellency. Well, that finally just got changed to what? The President, and then became the President of the United States. So that's how that came about. Okay? So, on April 30th, write that down, on April 30th of 1789, they inaugurated the first President of the United States into office. Where do they inaugurate the President today? Do you know, Dylan, where the President gets sworn in? What'd be a good guess, though? Not the exact location, but maybe the city. Washington, D.C. But anybody know specifically in Washington, D.C. where they do that? Anybody know that? I'm ready?
By that water.
Okay, it's actually the back steps of the Capitol building on what's called the portico or porch. Portico is a fancy name for porch. And it's done the back side. So if you're looking at the nation's capital, if you're looking at the House and Senate wings and the big dome and the entrance, they actually inaugurate the president on the back side facing the Washington Monument, that thing that looks like a big spear, facing that and the Lincoln Memorial when they inaugurate the president. But that's not where George Washington got inaugurated because Washington, D.C. hadn't been established yet. That wasn't the nation's capital. Does anybody know where the nation's capital was in 1789? No, good guess. No, big city. Yes.
New York City?
New York City. And you know where he got inaugurated on? Wall Street in New York City, which now is the home of what? What's on Wall Street now? Stock market. Yeah, stock market. So on April 30th of 1789, a crowd, not much of a crowd, gathered at Wall Street in the capital city of New York City for the inauguration of the first president of the United States, George Washington. Now, William, what's his first order of business? What's the most important thing that he's got to do now that he's inherited this presidency? What's the first thing he's got to do? That's good. That's good, but I'm going to be a little more covering the whole thing. He's going to end up having to do that. But what he's going to have to do is he's going to have to transform 28 students from world history into one group of U.S. history. Because you guys didn't have the same world history teacher, did you, last year? All of you had the same one? Well, he had to transform 13 individual colonies who were doing everything alone or independent during the colonial days into one United States of America. That will not be an easy task because some of these colonies are kind of stuck in their ways. And getting 13 different organizations to agree on the same thing is going to be a little bit difficult for him. Now, what else did they elect in 1789 other than a president of the United States? And to elect some other people to run this country. Because each colony had their own at the time, but we needed to have a group, a Congress. Now, you got to remember again, and kids get this mixed up all the time, so keep this in your mind. If you are a member of Congress, which I mentioned before, you are either a United States Senator or you're a member of the House of Representatives. There's always more representatives than senators because each state gets 2 senators and the representatives are determined by the population. So, after the election of 1789, which elected George Washington president, here's what Congress looked like. So make sure you write this down. There were 26 senators. Why were there 26 senators? 2 for each state now that was a colony. 13 times 2 is 26. There were 59 representatives, all based on population of those particular colonies. The colonies that had more people living in them had more representation, but all 13. So during the election of 1789, Congress was reorganized into 26 senators, 2 from each state, and 59 representatives from various states based on population. Okay? Any questions with that? We got a president, William. Can you believe it? First guy ever. We got a vice president, John Adams. And that's going to take us to our next subtopic, which is what, Raymond?
A presidential
Cabinet. Creating a presidential cabinet. You all should probably know that President Trump has a cabinet. Okay? See how it is compares to this day. Now, what are cabinet members? What's another word for them? What do they pick to do? What do they pick to do? Holt, what do you think? Why does President Trump pick a cabinet? Why does he pick a Secretary of State then? Absolutely, help them make decisions. And nowadays it's more specific. You have a Secretary of State that helps you with foreign affairs. I mean, you've got a million of these. Now, why is it important that the president pick good advisors? Megan? Why is it important he picks good advisors? Well, sure, what did you just say? What do they do? What do advisors do? Help make decisions. So why do you want to pick good advisors?
To make good decisions.
So you make good decisions, yeah. Now, it's kind of an interesting story. I'm gonna go forward in history a long ways, but it's gonna tie in here. So, back in 1960, when John F. Kennedy was elected president, he filled a cabinet, people to help him, advisors. And one of the positions at that time, not this time, but at that time, was Attorney General. Does anybody know what the Attorney General of the United States does in the President's cabinet? Attorney General. What would they do? Anybody want to guess? What do you think, Townsend? What's an Attorney General do for the President? What's an attorney do? You know what an attorney is? You know what a lawyer is? Yeah, a lawyer is the same as an attorney. Jordan, what's an attorney doing? What does an attorney do? In the case of law, right? So the Attorney General of the United States would advise the President in matters of what? Law. Keep him out of trouble legally. Make sure he does everything right. Now, here's my point. John Kennedy chose his brother Bobby Kennedy to be Attorney General in 1960, despite the fact that Bobby Kennedy had absolutely no experience as a lawyer. He had a law degree, but he never practiced 1 second of law. Haley, why would he do that? There's 3 reasons why John Kennedy picked his brother as Attorney General to advise him on matters of law, and the guy never tried a case. He just got out of law school. Why did he do that?
Because he trusted him.
He trusted him. Very good. There's one. What might be another reason that he would do that? What do you think there, Pierre? What's another reason he would pick his brother, even though he didn't have any experience? He trusted him. What else? Come on, Naomi. Why would you pick somebody? Why would you pick his brother? He's got no experience. You can trust him, right? Well, that's a good guess. Matter of fact, John Kennedy, he was criticized for picking his brother as Attorney General because he had no experience. And he had something called the Kennedy Whip. He had so many quick comebacks that they wrote 2 books on that, on his comebacks. And you know what he said when they criticized him for putting his brother in? He said, I don't see anything wrong with giving my brother Bobby some legal experience as Attorney General before he goes out and practices law on his own. I mean, I gave him the top job in the country, right? Just a little bit of a comeback. But why else would he trust him? His brother's probably what to him? The L word. You're loyal. He was loyal. But more importantly, let's look at this. Okay? Let's say that Dylan back there was elected president of Hanford's Landscaping Company. Dad turned it over to him. He's on his own. All of a sudden, he surrounds himself with advisors, people to help him run the business, because there's a paperwork part of the business, right, Dylan? And then you got to probably keep track of this and that, and you have people do that for you because you can't do it all. Well, all of a sudden, you decide that you're going to go over to your first customer's house and paint his grass pink because you think it'd be kind of cool. Now, one of your advisors, what would you want your advisors to do if they looked at that and said, they're thinking to themselves, geez, Dylan, we're not going to make any money on that. Matter of fact, if you do that to our first customer, we may never get another one. So what would a good advisor tell you? A good one, Dylan? One that didn't care if you were mad at him or not. What would they tell you when you told them that idea? You don't know. So you come up with this decision that you're going to paint somebody's lawn pink, and this advisor of yours thinks that's a bad idea. Would you want him to tell you it's a bad idea, or would you be more interested in, would he be more interested in you not being mad at him? Yeah, you want somebody that will tell you the truth for what's in the best interest. You don't, you're going to tell you what you think. All right? For example, from the school board to the superintendent, to central office, to the principal, to teachers, to the paras, custodians, etc., all the way down, every decision in this school should be made on what's in the best interest of you kids, because that's why we're here. So, if Mr. Sanford has advisors, people that he asks their advice, and all of a sudden he decides that every one of the boys has to come to school to dress on tomorrow, a good advisor would say, are you nuts? That's going to cause an uproar. An advisor that all they were cared about was making Mr. Sanford happy would say what? Oh, that's a great idea. That's perfect. Well, when Washington creates a cabinet, if he's going to be effective, he's got to put people in that he trusts, right? You don't want any backstabbers, people that are loyal, but he also needs to think about putting people in there that'll give him an honest answer in case he comes up with an idea that's bad. Okay? So, here's how it breaks down. At that time, there's many more departments now, but in 1789, Congress created 3 departments to help President Washington. You need to write these down. 3 departments. And they're really not any different than the 3 major departments today, other than the fact that one's named differently. Anybody know one of the important departments that the president has right now? Go ahead.
Judicial?
Well, that's an important one, but it wasn't one of the top 3. That would be your Attorney General. But that, whoa. Well, we didn't. Lester Epley may have been killed. Anyway, so what would be a department you're aware of now that pretty common one that helps the president? He's got a lot of them. Yes.
Is it the 3, are you talking about like the 3 branches?
Kind of. Go ahead and tell me.
So like there's the judicial branch, I don't know the other 2.
Okay, we're a little. That's okay. We're a little bit too broad. The first one is the Department of State, and who? Department of State. And what's the Department of State? What was it helped to create with President Washington? The Department of State was established to help him with his work concerning foreign and domestic affairs.